Nobody warned you about this part. They told you about the pressure, they told you about the decisions, they told you it was going to be hard. Hi, I'm Walter, and this is the hard truth. But nobody sat you down and said, there is going to come a day when you are surrounded by people who need you, who look to you, who depend on you, and you are going to feel completely and utterly alone. And the worst part? You won't be able to tell any of them. So you're going to sit with it. You're going to carry it into meetings and through all hands and across dinner tables at home, and you're going to perform okayness so convincingly that eventually you'll forget you were performing at all. If that sounds familiar, this video is for you. Not to fix it, not to give you a 5-step framework, just to say out loud what almost nobody in your position is allowed to say. You are not the only one who feels this. And the feeling has a name and a cause, and it is not weakness. Let me tell you about a CEO I know. She built her company from nothing, 14 years, went from 3 people in a co-working space to 400 employees across 3 countries. By the time she hit year 10, she had made it by every external measure. Cover of an industry magazine, keynote invitations, a leadership team she trusted, a marriage that had survived the startup years. And she sat across from me one evening, after a board dinner where everyone had been impressed and gracious and complimentary, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said, I have not had a real conversation in 2 years. Not a venting session, not a strategy discussion, not a performance review dressed up as connection. A real conversation, where she could say what she actually thought about the business, about her team, about herself, without calculating the consequence of every word first. She wasn't complaining. She said it the way you say something you've accepted but never made peace with. Quiet, certain, a little bit hollow. And I've heard versions of that same sentence from more leaders than I can count. Different industries, different company sizes, different personalities. Same silence underneath. Here's the thing that nobody names correctly about CEO loneliness. People call it the burden of the role. They call it the cost of leadership. They frame it like it's an inevitable tax on ambition. You wanted the seat? This is what the seat costs. Pay up and stop complaining. That framing is wrong, and it's doing real damage. Because CEO loneliness isn't just an emotional inconvenience. It is a structural problem. It is baked into the architecture of the role in 3 specific ways that compound on each other over time. First, information asymmetry. Everyone around you is managing what they tell you. Your direct reports filter up, your board filters sideways, your investors filter toward their own interests, your peers filter through competition and comparison. Nobody is lying to you, but nobody is fully telling you the truth either. And when you are the person who sets the tone, who controls the narrative, who holds the power in almost every room you walk into, real, unfiltered human honesty becomes almost structurally impossible to receive. Second, consequence contamination. Every relationship inside your company is contaminated by consequence. That doesn't mean the relationships aren't real. It means they can never be fully free. Your head of product might genuinely like you and still be calculating in some corner of their mind every time they speak to you. That's not betrayal. That's rational. But it means you never fully relax. You never fully arrive. You are always, on some level, the CEO in the room, even in the moments that feel casual. Third, the performance demand. Your job requires you to project a version of yourself that is more certain, more stable, more resolved than you actually feel on any given day. That performance isn't optional. It's load-bearing. People orient their own confidence around yours. So you perform. And the longer you perform, the further the performance gets from the reality underneath it. And the gap between who you are publicly and who you are privately becomes its own kind of isolation. Now here's the layer that most leadership content refuses to go near. This loneliness doesn't just happen to you. In many cases, not all, but many, you participate in building it. And this is the part I need you to hear without defensiveness, because it's the part that actually gives you power over the situation. Think about the last time someone tried to get close to you. Not romantically, not inappropriately, just humanly. A direct report who wanted to know how you were actually doing. A co-founder who tried to have an honest conversation about the emotional cost of the last year. A peer who suggested you should talk more. What did you do? Most CEOs, most high-performing, driven, self-sufficient CEOs, did some version of the same thing. They deflected. They pivoted to the business. They made a joke. They said they were fine, actually, thanks for asking. They moved on. Not because they didn't want connection, but because the conditioning of success, the figure it out alone, the stay stoic, the don't let them see you sweat, runs so deep that vulnerability stopped feeling like an option somewhere around year 3 and never came back. You stopped being someone who could be reached, and you did it so gradually, so unconsciously, that by the time you noticed, if you noticed, the distance was already built. And now you live in it, and you call it leadership. Here's where conventional wisdom gets this completely wrong. The standard advice is, get a coach, build a peer network, join a CEO forum, find your tribe. And look, those things have value. I'm not dismissing them. But here's what nobody tells you about CEO peer groups and coaching relationships. They can become another performance venue if you're not careful. Another room where you show up as the composed, self-aware, growth-oriented version of yourself. Another space where you are being observed and evaluated, even if the evaluation is friendly. Real connection, the kind that actually breaks through loneliness, requires something that no forum or coaching engagement can manufacture. It requires you to be willing to not know the answer. To sit in a conversation without an agenda. To say, I don't know how I'm doing, and leave it there, without immediately pivoting to what you're doing about it. I watched a CEO once, in a peer group I was part of, get asked a simple question. How are you actually holding up? And he talked for 6 minutes about the business, about the team, about the market. 6 minutes without once answering the question. The room let him, because that's what we do. We let leaders stay comfortable inside their own deflection because confronting it feels like an attack. That's not kindness. That's how the wall gets another brick. So here's what actually helps. Not 5 steps, because this isn't a process problem. It's a practice problem. The first practice is what I call radical location. You have to get yourself out of any room where you are the CEO, physically, contextually, relationally. This means finding at least one relationship in your life, one, where the other person has absolutely no stake in your company's performance. Not a board member, not an advisor, not a mentor who's also an investor. Someone who knew you before this, or someone who met you as a person rather than a title. And you have to protect that relationship like a business asset, because it is one. The second practice is what I call scheduled honesty. Once a week, in a journal, in a voice note, to yourself in a parked car, you answer 3 questions without any audience. What am I actually feeling right now? What am I pretending about? What do I need that I haven't asked for? Not to solve anything, just to say it somewhere. Because the problem with unexpressed inner life isn't just that it's lonely. It's that it atrophies. You lose the muscle. And leaders who lose the muscle of honest self-expression eventually lose the ability to read what's happening inside them entirely, which is when loneliness stops being uncomfortable and starts being dangerous. The third practice is the one that costs the most. It's tolerating being known. The next time someone in your orbit tries to reach you, really reach you, don't redirect, don't perform. Don't give them the composed version. Just stay in it for 60 seconds longer than is comfortable. That's it. 60 seconds of not deflecting. Because connection doesn't need an open door, it needs you to stop closing it. Here's the hard truth, and I want you to hear this not as an accusation, but as the thing a real friend would say to you if they could. The loneliness you feel is not because leadership is lonely. Leadership is hard. That's different. The loneliness you feel is partly because you have spent years, maybe a decade, becoming someone who is extremely difficult to actually reach. You did it for good reasons. You did it because the role demanded it, because the stakes required it, because vulnerability felt like a liability and you couldn't afford liabilities. I understand that. And it worked. You're still here. The company is still standing. But there is a cost running in the background of all of that. A quiet, compounding cost. And it shows up in the heaviness you feel after the board meeting when everyone goes home. It shows up in the distance between you and your co-founder that neither of you has named yet. It shows up in the way you can be in a room full of people who admire you and feel like you're watching it all from behind glass. You are not broken. You are not uniquely damaged. You are a human being who took on an inhuman amount of weight and learned to carry it alone because nobody gave you another option. This is me giving you another option. Not a program, not a framework, just permission to put some of it down. You don't have to perform this one. Not here. Nobody is watching. And if this landed somewhere real for you, share it with one person who you think needs to hear it. Not your whole audience, one person. That's how this conversation grows.